The church bells on Nob Hill tolled through the fog as Julian Hartwell watched his ex-wife, Lena, walk down the aisle toward his best friend. He stood frozen in the doorway, divorce papers folded in his pocket, his heart hammering louder than the organ music. Cole Merritt met his eyes with that polished smile, the kind that said, "I won." No one knew Julian still held the documents that could end everything they were celebrating. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, "Money doesn't change people, son. It just shows who they really are." And with that, the man everyone pitied quietly stepped forward. "Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa, United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica." Julian grew up in a 2-story apartment above his mother's bookstore in No Valley, a quiet corner of San Francisco where time moved a little slower. His mother, Marjorie Hartwell, spent her days dusting old shelves and her nights teaching him the art of contentment. She wasn't wealthy, or so everyone thought. Her shop, Hartwell Books and Coffee, smelled of roasted beans and paperback pages, and most days she barely broke even. But she was rich in something money couldn't buy: dignity, calm, purpose. Julian inherited all of it, or so it seemed. He became a mechanic, the kind of man who could fix anything except his own broken luck. In a city of Teslas and tech billionaires, he drove an old Ford pickup that coughed every morning but never failed him. When he met Lena, she was a nurse at UCSF Medical Center. She had an easy smile, a quick laugh, and dreams that stretched beyond the fog-covered hills. They met when her car broke down outside his shop. By the time he handed her the keys, she was already holding his heart. For years, they built a modest life. Evenings on the couch watching old movies, mornings sharing instant coffee before work. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Then, one cold February morning, Marjorie Hartwell died quietly in her sleep. The funeral was small, a handful of friends, old customers, and the lawyer, Diana Reese. Julian remembered the smell of incense, the drizzle tapping against umbrellas, and Lena's hand gripping his like she was already somewhere else. After the burial, Diana asked him to meet at her office overlooking Market Street. Julian expected paperwork, a few property deeds, maybe the bookstore. But when he sat down, she slid a single envelope across the table, sealed in wax. It was his mother's handwriting. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Inside was a message written in her familiar looping script. "My dearest Julian, you once told me you'd never care for money, only for meaning. I believe you. But I've also seen what money can do to others. The wealth I've hidden was never meant to protect me, it was meant to protect you. Find the truth. Trust your heart. The rest will reveal itself in time." Julian frowned. Wealth? His mother had debts, not assets. Diana opened a folder, her tone soft but steady. "Julian, your mother invested in several Bay Area companies back in the late 90s. Small stakes, forgotten shares. One of them grew. A lot." Julian blinked. "How much is a lot?" Diana leaned forward. "Roughly $45 million. He felt his throat tighten. The room spun. His mother, the woman who lived in thrift store sweaters and reused coffee filters, had been a secret multimillionaire. Diana explained that the money was tied up in a trust with strict moral conditions. If Julian used it for greed or married for gain, or allowed dishonesty to control his household, the assets would be frozen permanently. He left the office numb. The fog outside felt heavier than usual, pressing down on the city like a secret trying to suffocate him. That night he told Lena. At first, she didn't react. Then her eyes widened, a gleam of disbelief and excitement flashing across her face. She hugged him, whispered how proud she was, and said, "We'll finally live the life we deserve." But something about the way she said, "we," didn't sit right. Over the following weeks, Julian noticed changes. The way Lena lingered on real estate listings for Pacific Heights condos. The way she started meeting coworkers for networking dinners. The way she talked about money, like it was oxygen, and she just realized how much she'd been deprived of it. Julian told himself she was just dreaming bigger. But deep down, something in him whispered that the inheritance wasn't a blessing, it was a test. You ever notice how money doesn't really change people. It just unmasks them. And sometimes, the person underneath isn't who you thought you married. The act ends with Julian standing in the darkened bookstore, the city lights flickering outside. He runs his hand across the old wooden counter where his mother used to sit. The place feels emptier than ever. In the silence, he whispers to no one, "You were right, Mom. I just hope I figure out what you meant before it's too late." And as the fog drifts through the open window, we move toward the moment where love begins to turn into betrayal. The weeks after the inheritance announcement felt strange. Lena still kissed Julian goodnight, but the warmth behind it had cooled, replaced by calculation. She began speaking a new language, one made of price tags and possibilities. Their modest apartment in Daly City suddenly felt temporary. The dented pickup Julian adored became outdated. She filled their shared vision board with photos of Pacific Heights homes, rooftop gardens, and charity galas. Julian told himself she was just dreaming big. After all, wasn't that the American thing to do? But at night, when she thought he was asleep, she scrolled through designer sites, whispering brand names like prayers. By spring, she dyed her hair lighter, joined a Pilates studio, and started having lunch with Cole Merritt, the old friend who'd once helped Julian rebuild his first car. Cole was different now, tailored suits, tech broker swagger, a smirk polished by expensive bourbon. He told Julian he wanted to help manage the trust, claiming experience in investments. Julian declined politely. His mother had taught him never to mix friendship with money. But soon Cole was calling Lena instead, offering advice, introducing her to the right people. Lena came home glowing from those meetings, her words dripping with admiration. Julian noticed the way she said, "Cole understands things you don't." It stung more than he admitted. He tried planning a weekend getaway to Mendocino, hoping to reconnect, but she said she was too busy networking. By early summer, the house no longer smelled of coffee and motor oil. It smelled of tension. Lena began keeping secrets behind a locked phone screen. Julian found new credit card statements in her name, luxury purchases she brushed off as business expenses. He caught himself counting the days she didn't come home before midnight. One Thursday night, as the fog rolled over Twin Peaks, Julian returned from a late repair job. Cole's black Audi was parked outside his apartment building. Every light inside was off except one, the soft gold glow of the living room lamp. Through the window he could see two shadows. Laughter. A hand brushing another. Silence, then the sound of a glass set down too carefully. Julian froze on the sidewalk, keys biting into his palm. He didn't open the door. He didn't need to. Some truths announced themselves in whispers. He stood there until the laughter stopped, until the fog hid the window completely. Then he walked away, the city's chill wrapping around him like disbelief. He kept walking, past the glowing restaurants filled with strangers, past the gleaming Teslas humming through intersections, until he reached the edge of the bay, where his reflection rippled back under the streetlights. He remembered his mother's warning about what wealth can reveal. Maybe this was it. The next morning, Lena acted normal. She poured coffee, kissed his cheek, and told him she was heading to a medical conference in Palo Alto. Julian nodded. He didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, he drove to the bookstore his mother had left behind, unlocked the door, and sat among the dust and silence. On the counter lay a stack of unpaid invoices, and her framed photographs smiling back at him. He whispered, "Mom, what am I supposed to do with all this?" The question hung in the air unanswered. Days passed. Julian tried burying himself in work, fixing cars for old customers who still called him the honest mechanic. But even honesty hurts when it meets betrayal. He began noticing Cole and Lena's names appearing together on charity event lists. Photos surfaced on social media. A fundraiser here, a wine tasting there. She told him not to believe gossip. He said he didn't. But his silence had started to speak louder than words ever could. Sometimes, the worst kind of betrayal isn't when someone lies to you. It's when you can feel they've already stopped caring whether you find out. That evening, Julian received a voicemail from Cole. "Man, let's talk. I think we can make something good out of all this. You'll thank me later." Julian replayed it twice. There was no apology, no explanation, just entitlement. He looked out over the Bay Bridge, lights glittering like promises he no longer believed in. In his pocket he kept his mother's old letter folded small. Her words echoed again. Find the truth. Trust your heart. That night he decided to do exactly that. He followed Lena's conference to Palo Alto, parking outside a boutique hotel near University Avenue. Cole's Audi sat there again. He waited. Hours passed. At 1 a.m., he saw them step out together, hand in hand, laughing beneath the neon sign. For a moment, Julian thought of storming up, of shouting, of demanding answers. But he didn't. He turned the key in his truck, stared straight ahead, and whispered to himself, "I'm done pretending I don't see it." He drove away slowly, the fog swallowing the taillights. And that was the night Julian Hartwell stopped believing love could survive deceit. He didn't know it yet, but the next time he'd see them together, it would be at their wedding. The betrayal is no longer suspicion. It's undeniable, and the emotional collapse has begun. Morning light leaked through the blinds of Julian Hartwell's apartment, thin and gray like the fog that never really left San Francisco. He'd barely slept. Every sound outside, the bus brakes, a gull's cry, the clink of bottles from the cafe downstairs, felt sharper, heavier. It was the morning after Palo Alto, and everything he'd once believed about his marriage was gone. Lena came home just after 8, hair still damp from the hotel shower, pretending exhaustion. She kissed his cheek, called him honey, and moved toward the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Julian watched her hands shaking while she poured coffee. He said nothing. Silence, he'd learned, was stronger than accusation. Over the next week, she grew restless. The small talk faded, replaced by sighs and pointed remarks. "You never want to go anywhere," she said. "You're fine with this tiny life." He only nodded, his jaw tight. 3 weeks later, she placed an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside, neatly folded and freshly notarized, were divorce papers. No discussion, no tears, just a business transaction. She told him she needed clarity, that their paths had diverged. Julian stared at the signature line, then at her. There was no trace of the woman who once laughed barefoot in his mother's bookstore. He signed. The pen scratched across the paper, each stroke cutting deeper than words could. Lena exhaled, almost relieved. "I'll be staying with friends for a while," she said. She meant Cole. They both knew it. When the door closed, Julian didn't move. He sat at the table for hours, sunlight shifting across the floor. On the counter, a single coffee cup cooled beside 2 unpaid bills. Everything around him looked the same, yet nothing was. He drove to Ocean Beach that evening, parked near the cliffs, and watched the tide crawl in. The sea hissed against the rocks like it was whispering secrets he wasn't ready to hear. In the distance, the Golden Gate Bridge glowed faintly red through the mist, steady, unbroken. He envied that kind of strength. He thought of calling Cole, demanding an explanation. But what would that change? The betrayal was complete. Words would only give it shape, and he didn't want to hear it spoken aloud. Instead, he called Diana Reese, his mother's attorney. Her calm voice grounded him. "Julian," she said gently, "your mother's trust hasn't been fully activated. There's still documentation I need you to review. Come by tomorrow." He agreed, though his mind was far away. That night, back in the empty apartment, Julian opened an old photo box. Pictures of his mother smiling behind the bookstore counter, of him and Lena on their wedding day, of Cole standing beside them holding the ring box. Each photo now felt like a lie captured in color. He thought of something his mother once told him while counting change from the cash drawer. "If people ever stop loving you for who you are, don't beg them to stay. Let them leave, because staying would only cost you more than money ever could." Her words hit different now. He lay awake until dawn, the city's hum drifting through the walls. By morning, he'd made a decision, not about revenge, but about reclaiming his peace. He went to Diana's office downtown. She slid a stack of folders toward him. "These are the remainder of your mother's assets," she said. "Before we proceed, there's something else you should see." From a separate envelope, she pulled a letter, Lena's handwriting this time. It was addressed to Cole Merritt and Associates, timestamped 2 weeks before the divorce. Inside was a proposal to transfer control of Julian's investment accounts into a joint management fund. Cole's signature was at the bottom. Diana's eyes met his. "Do you want to press charges?" Julian closed the file. "No," he said quietly. "I just want the truth to finish its job." He left the building feeling lighter in a strange way. Emptied, yes, but cleaner. Back home, he boxed up Lena's things and dropped them at a donation center. He didn't leave a note. The clerk, a gray-haired volunteer, gave him a soft look and said, "Starting over?" Julian managed a small smile. "Something like that." "If you've ever been left by someone you built your world around," the narrator reflects gently, "you know the kind of silence that follows. It isn't peace at first, it's the echo of everything you gave, bouncing back at you with nothing left to hold on to. And maybe that's the moment you realize why stories like this matter, to remind us that kindness, loyalty, and love aren't wasted even when they break you. Because if this story means something to you, maybe it's because you've lived your own version of it. And that's why you should stay, because someone out there needs to hear that losing everything doesn't mean you're finished." Weeks passed. Julian reopened the bookstore. The shelves still smelled of his mother's favorite cedar polish. Customers drifted in again, drawn by nostalgia more than books. He spent his days repairing small engines in the back room, his nights reading by the window. Sometimes, when the evening fog rolled in, he thought of Lena and Cole, what they were planning, what they'd already taken. But bitterness never stayed long. It was replaced by curiosity. What would happen when the truth finally reached them? He didn't have to wonder for long. One afternoon, Diana called again. "Julian," she said, her tone urgent. "There's movement on the trust. Someone's trying to access accounts that don't belong to them." He didn't ask who. He already knew. Diana sighed. "They think you're out of the picture. You might want to attend a certain event next weekend." Julian leaned back in his chair. "A wedding?" "Exactly," she replied. "And something tells me your mother would want you there." He hung up, heart steady now, no longer shattered. Maybe this was the final chapter his mother meant for him to write, not in words, but in silence. He looked at the framed photograph on the counter, Marjorie Hartwell smiling as always. "Guess I'll see what they've built with the pieces they stole," he whispered. Outside, the fog drifted past the bookstore window, wrapping the city in its quiet gray arms. For the first time in months, Julian didn't feel lost inside it. He felt ready. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from showing up, calm and unbroken, in the very place they expected you to fall apart. And with that resolve, he began preparing for the wedding that would bring everything full circle. The following weekend, the city of San Francisco woke under a sky the color of pewter. Low clouds hung over the bay, thick and unmoving, the kind that made the Golden Gate look like it was vanishing into mist. Julian Hartwell stood at the edge of a parking lot outside the Langdon House, a historical mansion turned wedding venue tucked near Pacific Heights. The sound of music drifted through the walls, soft jazz, clinking glasses, laughter that sounded too perfect. He adjusted the collar of his gray suit, the same one he'd worn to his mother's funeral. It still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, even after all these months. He hadn't been invited, of course. But Diana Reese had insisted he come, not for closure, but for truth. There were documents she couldn't legally hand over until a certain clause in his mother's will had been fulfilled. And that clause, ironically, involved this wedding. Julian waited near the side entrance, his breath steady but shallow. A group of servers rushed past him carrying champagne flutes. From inside, he could hear the minister's voice echoing, "To have and to hold from this day forward." He closed his eyes. He knew that voice. It was Cole's. And the woman standing beside him, in white lace and a practiced smile, was Lena. The betrayal looked beautiful from the outside. Diana appeared beside him, her dark trench coat glistening with drizzle. "You ready?" she whispered. Julian nodded. "As I'll ever be." She handed him a sealed envelope. "Your mother's final trust directive. When you walk through those doors, everything changes." He hesitated. "What's inside?" Diana smiled faintly. Let's just say your mother was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. Inside the ballroom, the guests clapped as the couple was pronounced husband and wife. Cameras flashed, the string quartet swelled, and Lena threw her bouquet toward a crowd of cheering friends. She looked radiant, until she saw Julian. The color drained from her face. Cole turned, confusion flickering across his grin, followed by disbelief. Julian? What the hell are you doing here? The room fell silent. Julian didn't answer. He simply walked forward, calm, measured, as if attending his own eulogy. He reached the front of the room and placed the envelope on the polished oak table beside the wedding cake. This, he said evenly, is from my mother. Lena's hand trembled around her bouquet. Your mother? Diana stepped forward, pulling a small microphone from her bag. Marjorie Hartwell left behind an estate valued at $87 million, she announced clearly. She structured it under a delayed reveal trust, activated only when her son's personal and emotional integrity were tested. Gasps rippled through the guests. Cole's smile faltered. Julian's gaze never wavered. Diana continued, Clause 12 states that upon evidence of betrayal by either a spouse or trusted associate, the full estate reverts exclusively to Julian Hartwell. Any party proven to have acted against his welfare forfeits all claims. The crowd murmured louder. A woman dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the marble floor. Cole's face flushed red. This is insane. That trust was dissolved when Marjorie died. Incorrect, Diana said. It was sealed under federal protection due to its size. And, she paused, glancing at Lena, we have the documents you both signed attempting to redirect Julian's assets. Lena's voice cracked. Julian, I didn't know. But she did. Her eyes gave it away before her words could lie. Julian stayed silent, his expression unreadable. The only sound in the room was the hum of the ceiling fans and the distant echo of a foghorn outside. Finally, he said softly, I didn't come here to humiliate you. I came to finish what you started. He turned to leave, but Diana held up a hand. Julian, there's one more thing. She opened the envelope, pulling out a handwritten letter, Marjorie's handwriting, unmistakably neat and elegant. The attorney read aloud. To my son Julian, you have inherited not just my wealth, but the strength to rise when others tried to bury you. This trust is not revenge, it's restoration. To those who mistook kindness for weakness, may this letter serve as their lesson. Your true inheritance is not the money, but the peace that comes from letting go of what was never yours to keep. Your mother, Marjorie. A heavy silence followed. Lena's tears finally fell, streaking through her makeup. Cole stood frozen, his jaw tightening as reality sank in. Every eye in the room turned toward them, the new couple, now exposed under the weight of truth. Julian exhaled slowly, a strange calm settling over him. Goodbye, Lena, he said quietly. And Cole, take care of what's left of your conscience. He turned and walked out of the hall, the sound of whispers following him like footsteps in the dark. Outside, the drizzle had turned to full rain. He didn't open his umbrella. He just let the water wash over him as he stepped onto the sidewalk. Diana caught up beside him. You handled that better than most would. Julian gave a faint, weary smile. Mom always said storms aren't meant to destroy you, they're meant to show you what was built to last. They reached the parking lot. The city lights reflected in shallow puddles, golden and alive. For the first time, Julian felt the faint pulse of freedom again. But before he could even start his car, Diana's phone buzzed. She frowned at the screen. Julian, you need to hear this. He looked at her, wary. What now? She hesitated. It's about Cole. He wasn't just after your inheritance. He was after something your mother kept hidden, a secondary estate under another name. And someone just tried to access it 10 minutes ago. Julian's stomach sank. Who? Diana's eyes lifted from the phone. Your wife. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the windshield like warning drums. Julian gripped the steering wheel, the engine idling low. And that's when he realized the story wasn't over. The betrayal had layers, and the next one was already unfolding. Rain sheeted down in steady gray lines, blurring the glow of Market Street as Julian sat motionless in the driver's seat. Water streaked down the windshield, distorting the city lights into ribbons of gold and red. He didn't start the car. He just stared ahead, his thoughts crawling back through every lie, every quiet betrayal that had led him here. His wife, his best friend, his mother's legacy. Diana's voice broke through the hum of rain. Julian, we need to move. Whoever tried to access that account did it from your mother's old bookstore computer. The one you haven't turned on in months. Julian's pulse kicked. That's impossible. But it wasn't. He knew Lena still had the spare key. By the time they reached the shop, the fog had rolled in thick, wrapping the street in silence. The front door was ajar, the bell above it broken. Inside, the air smelled of wet paper and dust. A faint light flickered in the back office. Julian stepped carefully, his shoes creaking on the warped floorboards. He found Lena sitting behind the old desk, her hair damp, mascara smeared. The laptop glowed before her, his mother's antique oak one, the same one she used to keep receipts and handwritten letters. Lena didn't look up. I thought I could fix it, she whispered. Julian stood still. Fix what? Her hands trembled. The money. Cole's in trouble, Julian. He's not who you think he is. He owes people, dangerous people. I just wanted to take what we could and start over before they came for him. He didn't respond. The irony burned too deep. Your mother, Lena continued, voice cracking, she hid more than one account. She put millions in a trust under another name. I found the passkey. I thought if I... Julian interrupted softly, if you stole it, everything would finally be worth what you lost? She flinched. The sound of the rain against the windows filled the pause between them. Julian walked over, closing the laptop. You don't get to fix anything, he said. Not anymore. Lena stood, her tears mixing with the rain on her face. I loved you once, Julian. He nodded, tired. And I believe that's what makes this hurt worse. She took a step forward, reaching for his arm, but he pulled away. The gesture wasn't harsh, just final. From the doorway, Diana spoke softly, Julian, the police are on their way. Let's go. Lena's shoulders sagged. Please, don't ruin me. Julian looked around the shop, his mother's handwriting on the old chalkboard, her favorite mug on the shelf, the smell of the cedar polish still faint in the air. He felt something deep inside him shift, anger turning into something quieter, something older. Lena, he said finally, you did that all on your own. He turned and walked out, leaving her there in the pale blue glow of the monitor. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. The street was empty except for a taxi idling under a flickering lamppost. Diana followed close behind, her umbrella tilted toward him. Are you okay? She asked gently. Julian looked up at the night sky. For the first time in a long while, yeah. As they drove away, the bookstore faded in the rearview mirror. He didn't look back. A few days later, Diana called with news. Lena had confessed everything. The attempted fraud, the manipulation, Cole's debts. Cole himself had fled the city, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unpaid investors. The secondary estate, the hidden one, had been real. Marjorie Hartwell had placed it under the name Blue Lantern Trust, a nod to the bookstore she'd loved more than anything. But here was the twist, that trust wasn't financial. It was philanthropic. Millions earmarked for literacy programs, community libraries, and housing projects across California. Diana met Julian at the pier, the air thick with salt and wind. Your mother wanted this to be your legacy, she told him. To see if, when given everything, you'd still choose to give something back. Julian watched the water move in slow silver waves beneath the dock. The fog was lifting now, sunlight cutting through in thin, hopeful streaks. He smiled faintly. She always knew what she was doing. Over the next months, Julian poured himself into restoring the Blue Lantern bookstore. He transformed it into a community hub, a place for children to read after school, for older residents to share stories, for the lonely to find warmth again. People came not because of the money, but because of the feeling, the quiet reminder that kindness still had a home. Sometimes, when he locked up at night, he'd glance at the framed photograph of his mother on the counter. "You were right," he'd whisper. "Love doesn't end, it just changes form." Lena never came back to San Francisco. Word spread that she'd left the country, chasing another promise somewhere warmer, somewhere she could pretend none of it happened. Cole was eventually caught for fraud in Nevada, and his name disappeared from the headlines as quickly as it appeared. Julian never spoke of them again. He didn't need to. The city moved on, and so did he. You know, people like Julian remind us that loss doesn't mean failure. It's just the part of the story where you start over. And maybe that's why we keep listening. Because in the ruins of what we thought was the end, sometimes we find the beginning we were meant for. He turned off the lights, stepped outside, and locked the bookstore door. The fog rolled in slow and soft again, curling around the street lamps like memory itself. As he walked home, the rain began to fall lightly, a quiet rhythm, steady and forgiving. And somewhere in that sound, Julian finally heard what his mother had meant all along. That real wealth isn't what you inherit, but what you rebuild after you've lost everything. The story ended not with revenge, but with peace. Not with power, but with purpose. Because some endings aren't meant to break you. They're meant to set you free.